going on, everybody? Today we're talking about a book review. You guys know that I don't do a ton of those on my channel, but the times I feel like it's important to do a book review, it's on these books that kind of have hot takes on them. And Layla is a book that has people either saying that it's fine or just plain bad. I disagree. I actually really do enjoy it, and that's why I wanted to talk about it. This was written by Colleen Hoover, who is pretty well known to be a very good author. She does not just write books like Verity, It Ends With Us, It Starts With Us, Reminders of Him, and then just write a crappy book. It's not how it works. So I started to realize why it was that people didn't like this book. I really do believe that it completely depends on how on the surface or under the surface that you tend to read. If you read more so on the surface, you might hate it because of the implications I guess it has. Because it is a book that contains things like abuse or potentially some infidelity, even if it was like emotional cheating. But again, all of that is on the surface. You're not really understanding what it truly means. So this book review is going to be the first portion non-spoilery. The second portion, however, I will spoil the whole thing for those of you that have already read it or don't plan on reading it at all. The book centers on two main characters. You got Leeds and you got Layla, two L names. They meet, they fall in love together, they're soulmates, it's perfect. That is until one day they are both shot at by an assailant of some kind. Layla gets hurt the most and she ends up at the hospital, and when she comes out of it, she has a little bit of amnesia, she doesn't like thinking about the past, and to help them kind of grow closer together, Leeds takes her to the bed and breakfast that they first met at. But the longer that they stay there, strange things begin to happen. He soon begins to realize that the place is actually haunted by a spirit named Willow, who he starts to unfortunately grow feelings for. The way that Colleen Hoover writes is interesting. A lot of women really like her stuff because it is filled to the brim usually with just romance tales, and I can see that, but the way that I have read her books in the past, and the same goes for Layla, is I don't really care for a lot of them until they hit about the 50% mark, and then it just skyrockets for me, and then I end up loving them. The only exception for her books that I love from beginning to end, I think, was Verity. Reminders of Him was pretty close too. But I didn't review those on YouTube because most people agree with me and think that they're awesome. This is the one that is more bittersweet. So I think the main thing that people do understand under the surface here is that the book is trying very hard to approach the concept of soulmates in an interesting way. I don't like using that term though, soulmates, because people do connect soulmates to something much more tangible and real and an idea, like a relationship in general. They could just consider a very good relationship soulmates, but that's not really what soulmates means. It means beyond our plane of existence, and that's essentially what Layla's all about. They also don't like Leeds because he ends up not treating Layla very well because he prefers to talk to Willow. Now, the reason is a spoiler. I can't really talk about it. The thing about that is, though, he's really at odds ends about it. He hates the fact that he's doing it. He feels like he has no other choice, especially because he knows that he loves Layla and this all feels wrong, but at the same time, he wants to help this spirit who he's grown pretty close to. So he has no idea what the right move is to make, especially because there's nothing in the rulebook that says anything about how to deal with spirits. So he's not automatically just this bad guy to be a bad guy, no. If you read the book, you realize that there are a lot of twists and turns that go along the way that you didn't even think was even remotely the case in this book. But once you do, you're like, oh, snap. So read the book, but I'm gonna go on to the spoiler section of this book review. So like I was saying, under the surface, you have to realize that it's all about soulmates. Again, I don't like to use that term, but I don't really know what else to use for what this book is about, because essentially, when Layla was shot down, she was shot down by Leeds' ex. Layla dies, just for a few minutes. During this time, when she dies, Leeds shot his ex in retaliation, in revenge, and his ex died. They're both dead. And then, as far as I remember reading, his ex doesn't regain consciousness, only Layla does. And when she was dead, both spirits were just kind of floating in thin air. And when Layla comes back to life, it's not Layla anymore, it's his ex in her body, which means that Layla is stuck in the netherworlds and she doesn't remember anything. Again, amnesia, she doesn't remember her name, whatever. So she comes up with a name, just calls herself Willow. So at the end of the day, Leeds never cheated on Layla. He never even emotionally cheated on Layla. He was in love with her the entire time, and it's very confusing to the psyche because how do you explain that? He didn't think that Willow was Layla, but the reason why he fell in love with Layla in the first place is the same reason he fell in love with Willow, because it's the same person or the same soul in this instance. People think of infidelity and cheating and things like that as something very on the surface. So you are with one person physically, and then you swerve, and then you're off with somebody else physically, and then it's very wonky. But in this case, we're not talking about physical. We're talking about mystical, paranormal. He never swerved and swayed from his love and his heart. That always stayed the same, no matter what happened in the book. You, as a reader, if you're on that on the surface stuff, you're gonna be like, oh, what a dirt bag, because he ends up tying up Layla and then having these thoughts about Willow and wanting to be with Willow, and you get this idea that he's falling out of love with Layla because he hates her at this point. But he never fell out of love with Layla. When his ex took over Layla's body, he didn't love that because his ex was in the body. So it kind of gives off the idea that the person that you fall in love with in life is not their physical form, it's who they are and what makes them them, their soul. I think that's why this book is so good. But if you just read it as on the surface, what this guy does physically, you might hate it. Open up your mind a little bit. You'd be surprised. Check it out. I give this one 5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads.